Hello, and welcome to the channel if you're new, and welcome back if you're returning. I, today, am making a video that was given to me as an idea from Jasmine Ambrosia. If you don't know who that is, I'm sure you do, but if you don't know who that is, I'll link her channel below. Yes. On a recent video of hers, she talked about three, traditional American spirits that follow, this idea of being named Jack or John, right? And that's something that we see a lot of in folklore in England and in America. And I mean, you could ask why. I will go into this further in the future about Jack and John named spirits because there are a lot of them. But for this video, we're just going to say that a lot of spirits are called Jack or John because those are very, very common names in colonial America and in Britain as a whole, but particularly in England at the turn of, you know, at the turn of the 18th century. So, anywho, I wanted to talk about. Do you ever do that? Your mind's just like bloop. Anyway, I wanted to talk about some spirits that I grew up with personally, hearing about as a child here in Alabama. I almost said rural Alabama, but that would be an oxymoron because the entire state is rural. To give you context, my family is from a place called Waterloo, Alabama. I grew up personally in a neighboring town called Florence, which is much bigger than Waterloo, but is still very tiny by the standards of America. Because as I said, Alabama is a rural state. Like, we are the southiest of the South. We're surrounded on all sides by southern states, and those states are cornered by southern states. So we're in real deep. But as I said, my family is from Waterloo, and I spent a lot of time in Waterloo as a child because that's where my mother was from. All of my cousins and my grandparents lived there. So Waterloo is a town of like 100. Let's see. Back then, it probably was a town about 100 people, maybe 150 people that lived in the entire town. As of a 2020 census, I did look this up for the video. As of 2020, 183 people live there, I think. So it's still very tiny. And you heard me correctly. Just 183 people. Not 183,000. Just 183 people. So it's very tiny. It's very tiny. So because of that, Protestant Christianity is very popular, obviously, there. And here. I'm saying it like I'm not there. It's very popular here. But so is folklore, old folklore. Things that would be considered pagan or witchcrafty are really just considered like folk belief and a part of Christianity here. Which is exciting, but also sometimes confusing or infuriating. Something that I grew up with in my very heavy folkloric Christian raising was the Booger Jack or Booger Jack. So Booger Jack is, from all the research I've been able to find, is a really regional name that we have here in northwest Alabama, and that would be like the southern western Tennessee and the northern, I'm having a picture of the compass, and north eastern Mississippi. So that little crossover our states, because Waterloo's kind of up in that corner. It does seem to be something that's pretty much located here. I would love to hear otherwise. If you've heard of Booger Jack, then please let me know down below. That would be awesome. But yeah, it seems to be something pretty local to here, I think, in my area. And Booger Jack, or a Booger Jack, is something that I grew up as a kid. A lot of people that I've talked to around here have also heard that. My husband grew up with that too. His family's from here. But he was raised in Georgia. Booger Jack is kind of like the boogeyman. Obviously, you can hear a name similarity there. Like if you've ever looked up the boogeyman, you've also seen that he's been called the bogeyman or the booger man. So I think that probably Booger Jack is some kind of, as I said, a regional evolution of that. And that was definitely how he was presented to me as a child. Booger Jack was something to absolutely be terrified of. Booger Jack was an entity that I was told that if you play too close to the woods, like you either need to play in the woods or you need to play out here in the yard, not on some area in between the woods and the yard. Okay, because if you did, that's one of the ways the Booger Jack would get you. And that dings some bells now, for many of us, as, oh, this is a liminal spirit. It's the fear of in between spaces because they are unstable or gray. So I love that about the Booger Jack. But also, I was told that if you do go into the woods, don't talk to anyone that you meet in the woods. Even if you think it's a friend of yours that you're like, hey, you're playing in the woods too. Don't talk to them because it could be the Booger Jack. So the Booger Jack is also like a changeling spirit. He's a shapeshifter. And the idea was that the Booger Jack would lure you into the woods deeper and deeper until you could not find your way back out. And Ma and Pa, my grandparents, my mom and Pa would tell me a lot that, like, if I didn't behave, right, they would call the Booger Jack to come get me. My mom would threaten me with the Booger Jack. And, it's funny. Occasionally, very rarely, but occasionally I would hear other kids in the neighborhood that I grew up in talk about, there being some kind of, bad guy in the woods. I mean, that's like universal folklore. But, and sometimes they would also say Booger Jack. Or just Jack. And it's interesting because now as an adult, you try to create connections, even when sometimes there isn't a connection. But that's what I do as a folklorist and as a mythologist of American paganism and magical practice. I try to connect potential threads. And I think it's interesting that this idea that maybe Booger Jack is Jack in the Green. They could be the same. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're brothers. Maybe they're two sides of the same coin. Who knows? But I find it interesting that he only seems to reside in the woods. Never like in your house. Like he's not the same as the boogeyman to me because he doesn't like hide in your closet. He doesn't hide under your bed. He's not in the city. He's always in the wild and of the wild and wants to lure you into the wild. So he's kind of a haint. A haint is like a southern term for a spirit, usually a malicious spirit, not always. Haint is just like a southern drawl on like haunt. So, yes, Booger Jack. I also, and I talk about this in Goblin Grimoire, I think I did, which is my book that you can get on Amazon. Please check it out. But there's bugbears, right? Which is a type of goblin spirit that resides in the woods and is very large. And the Booger Jack definitely seems very similar to bugbears. But who knows? Who knows? I myself have worked with Booger Jack as a spirit, I guess a shadow spirit. As he's like a keeper of fear. So there's that. But I also wanted to talk about Jack Frost. We've all heard of Jack Frost. That's not just a southern thing. That's everywhere. I also, as a child, and I don't know when it started. I feel like I remember knowing about Jack Frost and the threat of Jack Frost as a malicious entity. Before my mom told me about it. So it might have been something also that I learned from my mom and pa. I'm not sure. But I remember hearing, and again, in my neighborhood, other kids would also say this. Like we shared lore with each other, like ghost stories and things. I mean, that's what children do. At least when I grew up. In the early 90s, that's what we did. But there was no internet. So you had to share things with each other in person. So Jack Frost was this, it was idea that there was this guy who he like died I forget the whole story. There's different versions that we would tell each other, but it was like there was a guy who was trying to get home to his wife because she was in labor and he couldn't get to her, and it was storming. It was the middle of winter, and he tried, but he couldn't get to her, and he froze to death on the way home to get her because his car had broken down and he was walking through the snow. That was the story. And he died. And now he's angry and always trying to find his baby. So, and his wife. So the idea was that he's always trying to get into your house because maybe your house is the house that his wife and child are in. And obviously this is a little different from the Jack Frost that you might think of, which is just like a little like sprite, elven almost character who just brings upon winter temperatures. And so the idea was that if you slept with your window open, he would crawl in through your window and kill you once he found out that you were not his child. Like you would freeze to death. Which makes sense too, because if you leave your window open during winter and go to sleep, it's going to get real cold. And you might freeze to death. You might just get a real bad cold, but you shouldn't do it. So anyway, I grew up with that. This Jack Frost character that was like, had a backstory, as I said, of he used to be a man and he froze to death. So that's the Jack Frost I grew up with. And I would love, if anyone else is Southern who watches this channel, anywhere in the South, you don't have to just be in Alabama. Please comment down below if you grew up with any Jack spirits like that, like a Jack Frost or the Booger Jack. I would love to know if you grew up with those. And if you heard stories like I just described. But I also wanted to talk about a female spirit named Jenny. Green Jenny. Northwest Alabama. And the Booger Jack that I grew up with. Oh, I did want to say, before I go, if you're interested in, excuse me, in Southern folklore, specifically Alabama, in the recommendations I'm going to give you, because as I said, Alabama has a very rich history of folk magic and folk spirits, I'll say. Some books that are a great jumping off point are Haints, Ghosts, and Boogers. That's a great one. Very short. Nice little intro, though. Let's see. We also have Erie, Alabama, which this is really mostly about cryptids in Alabama. And again, if you're interested in that, I will definitely make videos about it. We have several cryptids in Alabama that have never been reported in any other state. So that's cool. But then, of course, we have our own share of versions of characters, like Bigfoot and stuff. But some native Alabama cryptids I really like are like the Wampus Cat and Catzilla, which is actually about a catfish. I personally grew up with stories being told to me by Catzilla, about Catzilla, by my pa and by a bunch of other fishermen. Because again, it's a catfish. Anywho, great book also. And lastly, also going off of the Booger Jacks, Boogers and Boo Daddies is also very good. And not just about Alabama. But yes, very good also. If you're interested. As I said, comment down below if you're from the South and tell me what ghost stories or creatures you grew up with. Especially if it's Jack Frost. I would love to hear that. And Booger Jack. That would be awesome. Or Green Jenny. And tell me your versions of the Green Jenny story. That would be awesome too. And I know I brought up Hug and Molly, but we'll save her for something later, I suppose. If you're interested. So let me know. As always, I really appreciate your support. And goodbye.